Let me welcome you to this first session of the conference on the topic, the New World Order, Recipe for War or Peace. Now, author Ken Adachi, in giving a definition of the term, provides three major features, as elaborated by Tan Sri Nor and Mai. Firstly, it refers to a worldwide conspiracy. Secondly, it is something that is orchestrated by an extremely powerful, wealthy, and influential group of individuals. And thirdly, the goal is to create a one-world government, stripped of nationalistic and regional boundaries, that is obedient only to their agenda. Now, this definition clearly fits well with the actions or semblance of actions made by those in Europe or the West. But some may want to argue that the activities of ISIS could also be an attempt to create a new world order of their own. So the topic today is most apt. It is not just about the new world order, but the global implications of the order. We are fortunate to have been able to assemble with us here this morning a distinguished group of eminent panelists and experts from various parts of the world to speak on the topic. Now, our first speaker is Dr. Thomas Barnett from the US. Dr. Barnett will focus his presentation on his book, The Pentagon's New Map, War and Peace in the 21st Century.
So, the proposition that's been made is that we are on the path or have already begun the Third World War. My message here today is going to be dramatically different from that perspective. On too many measures to count, I can prove to you that the world today is more peaceful than it's ever been in human history, that it's more stable, that the control of economic activities, disasters, more advanced than ever before in human history, that people are living longer than ever in human history, that they're eating more calories. So the notion that the world is suffering chaos, to me, is a complete myth. We are actually living in the most peaceful, prosperous time in human history. So this is the concept. We are sold constantly by media and by academics of a certain stripe who want to sell you this notion that we live in a world of constant warfare, constant danger, chaos, no ability to control. One of the ways this is propagated, ever since I was a young child, I was told we are on the verge of 40 to 50 nuclear powers. Here is the history of the spread of nuclear weapons. It goes to the Russians, it goes to the Brits, it goes to the French, and the French gave it to just about everybody they could. But we start to see governments give it up. South Africa, 1984. Iraq was made to give it up by the Israelis. Former Soviet republics gave it up voluntarily. Gaddafi gave it up after he was scared by the US-led invasion of Iraq. North Korea has reached for the bomb. Iran reaches. Algeria has reached. The Saudis have a promise from Pakistan to get the bomb the minute Iran weaponizes a nuclear weapon. So that looks like a lot of countries, maybe 3 or 4 dozen. But the truth hasn't changed. Here's your nuclear club. Here are the countries that have nuclear weapons on their land because they are part of NATO. These are the countries that gave up nuclear weapons voluntarily. These are the ones that were stopped by Israel. Israel may well do that with Iran. These are all the countries that had nuclear programs and gave them up with no pressure. So there's your 39 countries that supposedly should have nuclear weapons by now, but the truth is there are only 9 countries in the world with nuclear weapons. We are constantly told that nuclear proliferation is increasing. The truth is we got 7 nuclear powers in the first 35 years. We've gotten 2 in the last 35 years. What we have seen as a result is a downshifting of international conflict. We can look at the system, we can look at nation states, we can look beneath nation states. Here are the classic definitions of war. World wars, superpower wars, nuclear, great power. Then there is the traditional definition. One country attacks another country with their military. Then there are countries doing violence mostly to their own people. There has been no great power war since 1945. The frequency of state-on-state wars has decreased dramatically. Almost all the fighting and violence in the system today is within nations, not between them. We've invented a new term to describe this reality. We used to call war when country A and country B had a fight. Today, we have downshifted that definition to the concept of state-based conflict. That means a government fights anybody, usually individuals, usually its own citizens. If you look at this trend, there has been a rough doubling in the number of state-based conflicts since the end of the Second World War. But here's the reality, and when we talk about one world government, I'd like to point this out. Governments are proliferating like crazy. At the end of the Second World War, we had 100 governments. Since then, we've seen a doubling of state-based conflict, but you know what? We have twice as many governments in the world now. We can look longer across history. If you lived in prehistoric times, your chances of dying in conflict or war by violence was 1 in 6. When we got to the ancient world, it dropped to 1 in 20. The 20th century, the bloodiest century in human history, supposedly, a 1 in 33 chance of dying through conflict. You were much more likely to die from smallpox, biggest killer of the 20th century. Today, you're more likely to choke at dinner than to die in a war. You're more likely to kill yourself than to have somebody else kill you. So if we want to talk about a world order, World War III, there it is. The biggest threat is your state of mind. So let's talk about the subjugation of people. Because the truth is, what has exploded under the US-led, hardly a world order, but the US-led system since the Second World War is an explosion of democracies. A tenfold increase in democracies. We saw the height of dictatorships come and go. We've seen single-party states rise. Today, 60% of the world's governments are democratic, 30% are mixed, 10% are dictatorships. Guess where all the wars happen? They happen in the dictatorships.
Thank you, Dr. Barnett, for your most enlightening, dramatic, and very entertaining presentation, I thought. Our next speaker is Dr. Michel Chossudovsky from Canada.
My sincere thanks to Tun Mahathir for the inspiration that he has provided us almost for 10 years. We're talking about the historic declaration to criminalize war of December 2005. We're going on to our 10th anniversary of this historic declaration. And there's no compromise in this declaration. There's no rewriting of the truth. In Tun's presentation this morning, he was obviously referring to the United States of America, although he didn't name the United States of America, but I will name the United States of America. We are dealing with a criminal undertaking at a global level. And with all due respect to Dr. Barnett, who was actually on the advisory team of Donald Rumsfeld, who was convicted of war crimes by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal. The dangers of nuclear war are there because they have to do with preemptive nuclear war, which was inaugurated in 2001 in the Nuclear Posture Review. Now, I'm not going to dwell upon what was presented by the previous speaker, but much of this, I think, avoids addressing the fundamental issue, which is the criminalization of war, and the main actors are the United States of America and its NATO allies, and Israel. And this should be abundantly clear. We're talking about millions of casualties tied into US-led wars since the end of World War II, during the period which is euphemistically called the post-war era. And it should be understood, following in the footsteps of Nuremberg and under the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Declaration of 2005, that there is no such thing as a humanitarian war. All wars are criminal. They're crimes against the peace under Nuremberg. And there is an ongoing war. It is led by the United States. It may be carried out by a number of proxy countries, which are obeying orders from Washington. And I should stress, and this will be the main thrust of my presentation today, the global war on terrorism is a US undertaking which is fake. It's based on fake premises. It tells us that somehow America and the Western world are going after a fictitious enemy, the Islamic State, when in fact the Islamic State is fully supported and financed by the Western military alliance and America's allies in the Persian Gulf, and Turkey, and Israel. How do we know that? Because it's been acknowledged by the Israeli media back in 2011, DEPCA, Intelligence News, that the actual recruitment of the Mujahideen was undertaken under NATO auspices in collaboration with the Turkish High Command. Let me give you a piece of evidence here. It's a piece of an important picture. I think many people have seen this image, which dates back to June of last year. It's when the alleged Islamic State convoy crossed the desert from Syria into Iraq, and ultimately this in itself subsequently justified the bombing campaign under humanitarian mandate supported by Western countries to go in and bomb, to carpet bomb, not to bomb them, okay? Not to bomb IS, but to bomb the infrastructure of Iraq and Syria. Now I'm going to, I have a small quiz for the audience today, and we have several members of several military people here today. Just tell me, here we have a Toyota pickup trucks convoy, okay? With all due respect to Toyota, absolutely wonderful cars. But people who know anything about Air Force deployments and smart bombing, this is a piece of cake. They could have been wiped out in a matter of hours, okay? I mean, anybody who wishes to refute that, the IS convoy from Syria into Iraq crossing 200 kilometers of desert. And we will recall Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the retreating Iraqi armed forces, which was decimated. It was a criminal operation by the United States. But here we have the terrorists, and they say we can't get hold of them, we can't do anything, we can't catch them. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a military expert either, we can ask Dr. Barnett, but they could have been knocked off very easily, piece of cake. And why did they not do it? Well, they didn't do it because they're financing them, they're equipping them, they're advising them, they're training them in Saudi Arabia, and they are sending in their mercenary killers, integrated by US and Allied special forces, into Iraq, and they're using this as a pretext to wage a bombing campaign, including against Syria. This war in Syria was a US-NATO-led war. And it was coordinated also out of Israel from the Golan Heights. We have ample documents that these were paid killers, okay? And that the terrorists are, in fact, a creation of the US government. The recruitment of these terrorists is undertaken by NATO and the Turkish High Command in coordination with Washington, the Gulf states, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, where they actually train them, and so on, okay? So we are dealing here with what we will call state sponsors of terrorism. And when I said that this is a criminal undertaking, it is the most criminal and diabolical undertaking in history, at least in contemporary history, that the United States presents itself under the mantle of pro-democracy and counter-terrorism, when they in fact create and finance those terrorist organizations, and then allegedly they go after these terrorist organizations. And I should mention that in Syria, as of 2011, these terrorist entities were used to destabilize or attempt to destabilize the government of Bashar al-Assad, which is a secular government, and in which Christians and Muslims have lived together for generations. I sincerely hope that at the end of the day, we will address, I think, the most fundamental issue is not to toe the line of the Western military alliance, but actually to reverse the tide of war, and that can only be done through the criminalization of war and by a broad consensus which spreads across the land that war is a criminal undertaking and that the global war on terrorism is a fabrication, a big lie, and a crime against humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chosidovsky, for your presentation. Our third speaker is Professor Dr. Din Shamsuddin from Indonesia, who is Professor of Islamic Thought at the State Islamic University. And he is also the president of the Muhammadiyah, which is the second largest Islamic organization in Indonesia with 29 million members.
What we need today is indeed a kind of a paradigm shift of the world systems. Because what is happening today, as concluded by the Interaction Council of former head of state and government with the term a cumulative global damage. A cumulative global damage. This is the reality of our world today. Indeed, the Holy Quran, 15 centuries ago, has projected the situation. Even in one of the verses, I read the translation, corruption doth appear on land and sea because of the evil which men's hand have done, that he may make them taste part of that which they have done, in order that they may return. So very clear that al-fasad, corruption on earth, has been projected by the Holy Quran, by God's revelation, and what is done by the proponents of the old or the new world order, the hegemonic, oligarchic, and maybe plutocratic power in the world today, has been said in the Holy Quran as well, when God said, and when it is said unto them, make not corruption in the earth, they say, we are peacemakers only. Beware, that indeed are the corruption or mischief makers, but they don't perceive it. So this is our situation, and therefore what we need to do now is, in my opinion, a paradigm shift in the world systems, because the world system that encourage liberalization in economy, politics, and culture, which are the three main streams: the streaming of liberalization of politics, the imposing of the implementation of liberal democracy, of the global capitalisms, and the hedonistic culture of the world today. We need to kind of set up new world order, but in the sense of real new, by emphasizing new orientation, culture of peace, which emphasize coexistence, tolerance, caring, and sharing. There are at least three kinds of sharing that we need today. Number one is a sharing of space. By welcoming the others, we reflect an inner orientation to realize, accept, and receive the other's existence and being. This is that one is not living alone in this world, but there are many other human beings sharing the same planet Earth. This orientation will bring oneself to share a space in peaceful coexistence with others. Shared space constructed in our consciousness, it's the law of nature that no single entity is isolated from one another, and they interact in a dynamic, complex system of space and its inhabitants. Within this interdependent relation, it requires common sense and understanding on realities that space needs to be shared. I think the term in the Quran, ta'aruf, is not only to get know each other, but more than that is to advance mutual understanding, mutual respect, and even cooperation. The share of space among humans to other creatures, living places, environment, and to the nature. So there is a degree of necessity and responsibility to share space in many aspects of life, from urban designs, social space, and in dealing with nature in its resources justly and amicably, the special justice to include within. Our willingness for shared space will help to create harmony, peace, reduce potential risk of clash, and create more comfortable living. In a contrary, unwillingness to share space indicates egoism, aspirant for hegemony, and matter of domination, power exercise, and disturbing balance. The world is a common heritage in which human civilization needs to be based on tolerance, social awareness, and being responsible human being. And the second is a sharing security. The notion of shared security implies that security is collective public good, the collective responsibility of all people to meet our common need for security. The notion of shared security emphasizes that the security of the people, of human beings, should be at the center of attention. Similar to the notion of human security, shared security also requires a comprehensive understanding of security in terms of the metrics of human rights and needs. More importantly, shared security requires the involvement of all stakeholders to defend and advance human dignity. In this regard, religious tradition clearly provide the foundation for such undertaking. Third, shared security can be achieved only if we agree on the importance of understanding security as an attempt to acknowledge our common vulnerabilities and our shared responsibility to address them. Shared security cannot be achieved unless we understand each other's in security concerns. Most dialogue among civilizations or between different faiths often ignore or avoid the importance of this point. Within the current context of global divides, especially between the Muslim world and the West, though it's not relevant to dichotomize between the two, since Islam has become also an element of the Western culture, an understanding of common vulnerabilities and sources of insecurity is imperative. Here, it is important to acknowledge that the root cause of the tension between the Muslim world and the West, in addition to power politics and the politics of hegemony exercises by some major powers in the West, can be found, among others, within the persistent global injustice. We should work to eliminate this global injustice, which serves as a structural cause to the global tension. The West is indeed in a better position to address this problem. However, it is important to acknowledge that the elimination of global injustice alone cannot guarantee the birth of a world free from any tension and conflict between the Muslim world and the West. The Muslim world has its own predicament also, and this predicament also constitutes a challenge for attaining shared security. Many Muslims, in fact, the majority of Muslims, continue to live under the control of despotic regimes and authoritarian states. This characteristic of most of the Muslim world needs to be addressed by both Muslim population and Muslim rulers. Respect of human rights and democratic political order based on social justice and religious morality is the path that all of us should take. Freedom is an essence of Islamic teaching. Islam teaches and preaches that human beings should be liberated from exploitation by other human beings. The creation of political order that ensures and respects human dignity should be made a priority by Muslim rulers. Genuine tolerance and a sense of self-confidence among the population can only prevail a truly democratic order. It is within such democratic order that the notion of shared security can become a reality. So, the shared security, in addition to shared of space, may be added, the third sharing is shared of ethical values, that all religions, all nations have their own noble tradition and values, and we need to bring religions of the world, different faith, into a common word, kalimatun sawa, based on the same ethical values. Religions are of course, different from each other, especially in the stage of theology. But many of the religions, especially the revealed religions, share the same commonalities, especially with regard to human being and humanity. And indeed, religions is from God, but for human being and humanity. So, shared ethical values is also one of the need of today. So the people of different faith may work together and to work together for not only ta'aruf, mutual understanding and mutual respect, but also ta'awun, which is cooperation between religious communities and nation. This is at least some idealities from religions, from philosophy, universal values, to be instilled into our new paradigm, new world system, and this is the pillars of the new world order, but not the old one, not the old new world order, but the brand new world order. I think we need to work together for that cause. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum.
Our next speaker is none other than our fellow Malaysian, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar.
When the US President, George Bush Sr., announced a new world order in 1991, he was in fact heralding the arrival of a new era in global hegemony. The Cold War had ended in 1989. The Soviet Union had collapsed in 1991. The US was the sole military superpower in the world. The US was at the helm of what it felt was a unipolar world. That was the new world order for George Bush Sr. He was going to sustain the new world order through the instruments which had sustained US power for quite a long while. And what were those instruments? Number one, military power. Because the United States, even at that time, had more than 800 military bases girding the globe. And within a few years, the US was talking about the type of military power that stretches from the inner depths of the ocean to the outer reaches of space. Total spectrum dominance. So that's the military power which the US thought would help it to sustain this new world order. It was going to depend upon economic power to sustain this new world order. And what was this economic power? The US dollar, the world's reserve currency, its control over economic resources, the vital strategic routes that were important for its economic power, and of course, its dominant role in international economic institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and at that time GATT, and so on and so forth. The US was going to depend upon its control over people's minds and hearts, which is perhaps more fundamental than military power or economic power. Its control over the global media, its control over culture, entertainment, which are essential to dominance and hegemony. And the US knew that it would continue to depend upon these sources of power to sustain, to perpetuate its dominance. If you look at the situation after the Second World War, there have been numerous instances of regime change, which I will not elaborate upon, but I'll highlight just one, because it's something which we in this part of the world don't pay much attention to. The regime change that occurred on the 11th of September 1973 in Chile. The overthrow of a democratically elected leader, Dr. Salvador Allende, and the eventual emergence of a military dictatorship. And this is what the US has done over and over and over again, as yet another mechanism of control and dominance. But there is something else which was part of the post-1991 scenario. The US realized that apart from these four dimensions, it had to devise a way of dealing with recalcitrant states, of leaders who, in spite of everything, in spite of the US's ability to change regimes, to control minds, to control economic resources, to deploy its military power, in spite of all this, there would still be governments, there would still be regimes that were against US power. And not just US power, against Israeli power. Because this idea actually is an idea more closely associated with Israel. And what is this idea? It is an idea which emerged towards the end of the Cold War. And what is this idea that emerged towards the end of the Cold War? It was what happened in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the US realized the tremendous potential of manipulating religion, Islam, for the purpose of defeating its enemy. Let's not forget that in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, a group that emerged perhaps spontaneously at one stage because of the anger at the occupation of Afghanistan, but the Mujahideen, without any doubt at all, well established with numerous writings since then. The Mujahideen were manipulated, they were used by the US against the Soviet Empire. And they succeeded. The US, its allies, they succeeded in defeating the Soviet Union with the help of the Mujahideen. Now, this is something very important. The US realized the efficacy of manipulating religion, creating groups which, because of their passion for religion, would be committed to a particular cause, using such groups in order to further its own political agenda. Out of the Afghan war was born Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda was a creation of the CIA, a fact that was admitted in the British Parliament by Robin Cook, the former British Foreign Secretary. 1 week after he made that famous speech as a backbencher, Robin Cook died. So you see the role of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was the idea that gave birth to a lot of other similar outfits that have dominated the so-called terrorist landscape. After the Afghan war, in the midst of this new world order, we had a few incidents here and there that the world didn't really take notice of. 1993, the incident in the basement of the World Trade Center. And then you had 1994, what had happened in Saudi Arabia, and then 1996, Gulf of Eden, 1998, East Africa, one after another, different incidents that took place. The culmination was, of course, 9/11, 2001, 11th of September. Because the message that the US wanted to convey to the world as a way of defeating forces that were recalcitrant, that were not willing to submit to US dominance, was this. You know, these people who are against us are all terrorists. This was the message. They're all terrorists. And for Israel, this was an important message to put across, because Israel wanted the world to know that those who opposed Israeli occupation were terrorists. They could not be liberation fighters, they could not be freedom fighters, they were terrorists. So that message had to get across. And equally important, the message had to get across that these terrorists are a threat to human civilization. So the attack takes place on American soil. The first time there's been such an attack in American history, to show the whole of humankind that these terrorists are a challenge to, well, human civilization. We can expect terrorism and the manipulation of terrorism to continue because it has now become the fifth dimension of hegemony. I referred to the fourth dimension earlier. This is the fifth dimension. The conscious, willful, deliberate use of terrorism in order to perpetuate US-helmed hegemony. And this is why it's so dangerous, because millions get killed. The entire universe is mobilized for particular purposes, and we're all deceived in this game. We're not saying for one moment that you don't have terrorists who are terrorists and who have goals and objectives which are linked to violence. We're not saying that this is not happening. The fact of the matter is that terrorism is a major instrument of hegemony. And we have to say this loudly, we have to say this clearly, and we have to tell the world, whenever people talk about terrorism, that you are a sponsor and supporter of terrorism. Do not deceive the world by giving the impression that it is others, whether Muslims or non-Muslims, who are the terrorists. But you are behind this. This serves your interests. You've done this for quite a long while, and we know your game. And you cannot deceive us with some facile arguments about how the world has become a better place because of US dominance, which is utter hogwash. Utter hogwash. I ask myself, if this is the reality that challenges us, hegemony, different dimensions, a struggle going on, how do we respond to this? We in Malaysia and other parts of the world. Number one, I think it is so important for us to support groups that are resisting. To support groups that are resisting hegemony. We have been supporting one particular group of people for a very long while, the Palestinians. The Palestinians would be an outstanding example of people who have paid the heaviest price conceivable. They've paid with their lives for independence, for autonomy, for dignity. We must continue to support the Palestinians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, people everywhere who are standing up to hegemony, including people in Russia, in China, who are standing up against hegemony. Let's also support the new sources of power that are emerging. China is an example. There's Russia resisting dominance. And you have other examples here and there of countries that are trying to resist, and we must also support them. And perhaps, friends, there's something else that we should also support. A certain mood that has begun to impact upon the Western world, and we should be aware of this. If you look at what's been happening in Europe, there is a certain mood that is more inclined towards peace. They don't want war within segments of the European population. I do not think that any European leader would be able to sell the idea of an all-out bloody war to their own citizens. They don't want that, which is why you find that there is resistance to what is happening in Ukraine. And even in the United States of America, the popular mood is against war, which is why Barack Obama could not go ahead with his military strike against Syria, partly because of the popular mood against war. This, I think, is a very important change that has taken place.
Speaker is General Retired Ilyas Hana from the Middle East.
I'm not going to argue who is the culprit about what's going on in the region or in the world, because we know that the United States of America declared war 5 times, but interfered militarily more than 400 times all over the world. They imposed democracy on Japan after destroying Japan, as well as Germany. And they tried to impose democracy on the Arab world, especially in Iraq. But Iraq, unfortunately, is in shambles, in the chaos. Is talking about the global or New World Order and war, they go together. I think that when we talk about the global order or the New World Order, you have to talk about this ranking of forces, powers, hierarchy, and distribution of power. Talk about the global order or the New World Order. In the Middle East, we had many global powers still relevant to today's world, especially in the Fertile Crescent. So let's see the video, please. So this is, the Fertile Crescent, Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. Many powers have gone through this time, and the point of intersection is this area, from Egypt to Israel, to the Assyrian Empire. So when we talk about the Persian Empire, nothing different from that time until today. It's the pattern. So this is the Middle East, The Roman Empire, the same. So many global, many world orders have come and gone through this area. The Byzantine Empire and then the Islamic Empire, or Al-Khilafah. And then the Crusaders, the East-West conflict, before Christianity and before Islam. It's about interests and Salah ad-Din with the Crusaders. After the Ottoman Empire, we started to see the Western world coming into our region in order to really spread, let's say, colonialism. And then the creation of Israel, which was the worst geopolitical incident in the region. We still suffer, especially from Lebanon, especially in Lebanon, as well as the Palestinian question. After many great power came to this region, I think that we have the circle and the arrow theory. The arrow that, the context is different, social, political, and economic, but the circle still the same. Now, instead of having the Persian Empire, we have the American Empire in our region. In the Middle East, we have variable geography. In 1912, 1914, 1916, we were under the Ottoman Empire, and here comes a variable geography. Under the Ottoman Empire, we will go into another geography imposed by the West, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the secret one, who divided the region into between France and Britain. Today, no France, no Britain, but we have the United States of America. And this one created triangles of power in the region. The non-Arabs triangle, Turkey, Iran, and Israel, versus the Arab triangle. All of them are Muslims, however, except Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Now, the full pressure is on the Saudi Arabia trying to save what it can. Now, everybody is discussing using ISIS or using Al-Qaeda. Everybody in the region used Al-Qaeda, including Iran. After 2001 and the dethroning of Taliban, Al-Qaeda had a safe haven in Iran. Everybody is using Al-Qaeda for their own interest. Saudi Arabia helped Al-Qaeda in order to block Iran. But today, Saudi Arabia is fighting Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda or ISIS is becoming more dangerous on the situation in Saudi Arabia. So this is the Middle East, now triangles of power. Next, please. I'm going to give an example, for instance, the interference of Iran in the region, because Iran is a dominant power. We're talking about Lebanon plus and Syria minus, the war that has really created a de facto situation in the region. When we talk about Lebanon, this is Lebanon, but Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran as a Shia, is really interfering in Syria and changing, like it's a paradigm shift of geopolitical concept. Historically speaking, Lebanon was the soft belly of Syria. Now it is the protecting belly of Syria. Historically speaking, Syria interfered in Lebanon militarily. Now, for the first time, Lebanon is interfering in Syria to save the regime. The new grand strategy for the Middle East. The United States of America withdrew, so it shook up the system internally. Now, the United States of America won't go, as we say, the dictum, boots on the ground. No boots on the ground. The United States of America is trying to offshore balancing the powers in the region under the auspices of what we call security dilemma, the balance of power. So, KSA, Israel, and Turkey, and Iran, now with a surplus of power compared to others. So they have to go and really balance the region in order to have a stable. Now, the Middle East is within this new world order that everybody is talking about. We call it the shatter belt, where everything is going hot. The main issue and the main military goal for the United States of America is to degrade, contain, or destroy ISIS through also an Arab coalition, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and now Turkey is coming back.
Now, the last but not least speaker is Mr. Yoichi Shimatsu from Japan.
I've just come from a conference in Frankfurt, an anti-nuclear conference. Germany, as you know, was a divided country in the Cold War. It was a frontline nuclear state for both sides. It opted for a nuclear power industry, and on top of that, on both sides, and on top of that, there was the Chernobyl nuclear accident of 1986. But none of that deterred Germany from abandoning nuclear power until the 2011 Fukushima disaster, of which today, what is the date? We, I think, are very close to the anniversary. I'm a little bit confused by time zones, okay? As an example of what I did, what I do, I've spent 4 years in the field research, 12 trips into the Fukushima nuclear zone, finally on bicycle, because it's hard to access and there's heavy security there, to determine whether these long underestimated, Tokyo Electric now has upgraded its estimates of the nuclear releases, fantastic amounts of nuclear material, much of it high level, enriched plutonium of war grade quality, being released into the ocean, into the air, and affecting, in fact, the entire northern hemisphere. Not Malaysia, thank God, of course, yet. This is one of 3 sites that I found of a suspect nuclear weapons production facility. And if this is a Google image, let me see this thing. Yeah, this is a Google image of a conventional thermal coal burning power plant, 14 kilometers north of Fukushima. And strangely, and this is a Google Earth image. We see a couple of power generators. This makes 2,000 megawatts per hour. And strangely, it's a commercial plant, but it supplied all of its power to Fukushima, to the Fukushima nuclear plants. Very strange. They're supposed to provide power to everyone, but we're providing power to Fukushima. What is happening at Fukushima, and what is happening here that you have a huge, one of Japan's largest power plants providing power to itself? And this is the coal here, obviously very straight up. But over here, there's 2 excavated areas. Well, there were hardly any workers at Fukushima 1 when it was damaged. There were thousands of people working here. on this site, excavating it. And here we see trucks. That's a truck there. You see how huge this site is. Trucks go down here. They excavated this site. And here you see the outline of an underground structure, a building. Okay? The foundations of a building that they took out. As you go down here, you see this are piles of radioactive debris. And they're putting radioactive debris in this deep hole to explain the massive amount of radiation that's coming out of this place. It'll be presented to the world as a dump site, but the radiation was massive before. And here the trucks will go down, and here again you see another underground building, two of them here. One structure here. Oh, this is a road street, excuse me. Over here, underground structure. Obviously, no purpose other than a nuclear weapons lab. So this is some of the type of work I do. I try to use science, look at all the data, and we come up with hypotheses, just like any other science, and try to push on further. Okay, let me continue here. Okay. Now, the year that was, I think Dr. Barnett was perfectly correct in saying that we're seeing less war this year. You know, there's been the U.S. So-called pull-ups, but they're actually drawdowns of forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, so there's less killing going on. And then the wars in Syria and Iraq, the conflicts there, Libya and Ukraine, basically there was fighting, serious fighting, but they sort of were settled in stalemates. Basically, neither side can attain a total victory. However, we saw a number of ominous events, I call. They're smaller events, very ominous, on the scale of, World War II, Vietnam War. These are small events, but it was a very strange year for all of us who read the online press or any newspaper, okay? We saw this Ukraine operation, which people are debating. Who's behind it? What's really going on? What are they really fighting for? We see the mystery of the Malaysian aircraft crash, not crashes, one disappearance, one that crashed in Ukraine and the AirAsia, Malaysian-owned airline, crashing also, and tremendous amount of controversy over that online. We see the Syrian stalemate ending with this online rise of ISIS. Suddenly it was all al-Nusra in the beginning, and then suddenly after the fighting was more or less contained by this truce in Syria, suddenly this monstrous spectacle called ISIS jumps out at us. And everyone is wondering, who are these people? Okay? Then we have a Thai military coup. The greatest event of this year is the inauguration of the Asian Economic Community, okay, ASEAN Economic Community. This is the Asian European Union, and hardly a PIPA celebration, because the very core country there where everyone meets, Thailand, the most vibrant economy, is under military authority. Myanmar was supposed to follow the Thai model, but what happened instead, Thailand followed the Myanmar model. So it totally throws us off as a bizarre outcome. We have Ebola in West Africa, but the virus itself is a strain that came from Central Africa. How did it get there after 10 years in 4,000 or 2,000 kilometers of distance? How did it get there? Major mystery. I've written about this and analyzed that. We see this most recent Israeli bombing campaign of Gaza, and no one can really figure out what was this kidnapping all about. We still don't have a clear information of who actually did it, why, and what happened. It's still a bizarre crime event in terms of a police file of actually who were the perpetrators. Then we have the cyber attacks against Sony for this movie about the planned assassination of the Korean regime leader. Okay, so very strange year of news events for us, hard to make sense. And in the current world of multipolarism, large-scale invasion interventions are out. So therefore, we're going to see the rise of covert action. Okay? Things are going to be done that are not apparent under the surface. And that explains, I think, the general context of these mysterious events of this past year. So we have to use science. We have to use analysis to hear the inaudible, see the invisible. We've got to learn what's really going on behind the picture. And I think that's what's got everyone in this room puzzled. What really is going on? Now, the first question is, who's afraid of Vladimir Putin? Well, I, for one, am, because I think he's kind of a power, charged fellow, and I don't know which way he's going. He's hard for me to decipher. But that doesn't get me to either side with Russia or Ukraine. And there's NATO expansionism, yeah, but then again, it's none of my business. What I'm more concerned about, actually, is the Ukraine energy picture and the revival of the Japanese nuclear industry, okay? What's happening is that Toshiba Westinghouse is selling fuel rods to Ukraine and is planning to build the world's largest nuclear plant and storage facility near Odessa. So that's more my interest, more direct. So I'm looking at the economic, industrial consequences of this. I also noticed that this kind of nuclear development in Ukraine and in England, these sort of fringes of the European world, go against where I've just been, Germany, which has a non-nuclear policy. And so we see the fringes of Europe are going to go more nuclear, as the center of Europe is not. Obviously, the goal is to re-nuclearize the German-speaking world. So that's one issue. Then we notice fracking is going on there. BP, Exxon are doing fracking, the breaking down of the rock underneath the soil and with heavy water pressure and chemicals to release gas and oil. This is also going, a practice that is considered illegal and dangerous in the rest of Europe. Okay, so we see these practices that are foreign and opposed by green Europe being introduced in Ukraine and coming in. Why? Because Ukraine is on the Black Sea. Basically, Port of Odessa is a very convenient place to bring in oil, to put, let's say, an under Black Sea pipeline into Ukraine. That would replace the failed Nabucco pipeline that was supposed to run from Turkey through Romania into Austria. Ukraine is a perfect bridgehead for Middle Eastern oil coming in, supplied by the Great Western Corporation, and to bring in their plan is to float in nuclear plants. Huge barges, and they'll land nuclear plants there in Ukraine. So the Black Sea is key, okay? You know, ships, even large as oil tankers, are being hijacked all the time, right over here, off the Strait of Malacca, off of Somalia. We don't pay we pay the ransom demanded, ships let go, the crews let go, and we do it, insurance do it, companies do it all the time. Now, we're shocked because an airplane is hijacked. Why should that be so stunning to us when the cargo aboard the airplane is worth more than the air tanker? Okay, especially if it's technology like the Freescale microchip technology, microcontroller technology, which is called KL01, KL02, and KL stands for Kuala Lumpur. The world's leading microchip was developed in this city. That's incredible to, I think, all of you. I've been to their factory. It's not much of a factory, but they do incredible work there. You have some great computer engineers there, okay? And so this chip is extremely important to the future of robotics, miniaturization, you see these little drones taking off, and to the future of warfare. If you want to attack a nuclear plant, you can use little tiny robots to sneak into every crack and crevice to attack that plant. You don't have to drop huge bunker bombs on it. Much better form of warfare. By the way, Israel has announced it's developing a micro-robotics program. So my feeling today, on the first anniversary of the disappearance of MH370, Malaysian Airlines, I feel based on what we know, all of the science, all of the technology points to the fact that MH370 did not crash, that the people are not necessarily lost from this life, and that we should not give up hope, that there may come a moment, an opportunity to free the captives, if the captors haven't killed all of them yet in one way or the other, and to find that airplane inside an underground hangar somewhere in a country that is interested in robotic technology, micro-robots, and that we must make every effort for that rescue operation when the time comes, okay? So let us not give up hope. Let's continue the search, okay? Your other MH lost over Ukraine, also diverted electronically, it went off its flight path, and that little diversion, which sent it down and south, would put it on an angle toward the capital of Iran, Tehran, and the rebels there reported cadavers dressed like tourists on the ground. Bodies have been dead a long time. And this is a perfect vehicle for the delivery of biological weapons, okay, a dead body, all right? So we have yet to really find out what's really happened. And as you notice, as the bodies got sent back to Netherlands, suddenly the issue disappeared. The complaints disappeared. Something else is going on. And we don't have access to those pathology labs and what's really going on, okay? AirAsia is much more. You can, the crash. AirAsia, all Airbus. The biggest player in Southeast Asia, former U.S. ambassador to Thailand and Indonesia, Boeing Southeast Asia. Lion Air had made the biggest purchase of Boeing aircraft, I believe in the history, to a single airline of Boeing. Indonesian based, and it's the main competitor of AirAsia. Is this any surprise? People use dirty tactics. Remember what happened to the Sukhoi 100, the Russian aircraft that was supposed to be based here in Malaysia, right? A new Russian parts delivery, Sukhoi production repair service center here in Malaysia. That was gone on its first flight in Asia, in Indonesia, okay? And it flew from an Indonesian military base. We should not be surprised by industrial warfare. It's basically industrial, taking a step beyond industrial espionage into industrial sabotage. It happens all the time if you're a corporate executive. Siemens, the one green major company in the world, CEO gone. And GE, very happy, clinking glasses at GE. There is a lot of this kind of industrial competition going on. That should not bother us a bit. We just have to investigate things more thoroughly.
To thank all of you for listening in at the session this morning. And I would like to thank all our speakers for giving their excellent presentation, their perspectives with regard to this particular topic.